Hello and welcome to Truly Tragic Transits with me, Rebecca Lovett. This is our final episode of Series 1 and I hope that you have really enjoyed it so far. We have looked at the 27 Club, we have looked at the Mercury line and what that means for fame. We've looked at so many celebrity deaths and begun to try to understand, what is going on a bigger level. So thank you for sticking with me through this podcast, and I really hope that you found value in questioning some of the things that we maybe normally wouldn't question and we would take as fact. So this final episode for me is one of the most controversial. Mainly because this was a death that wasn't so long ago. It was only 6 months or so ago. And so with that, there comes an air of responsibility. There are trials still ongoing. There are people's lives still in the balance. There's a lot of confusion and illusion and disillusion around what has happened. So I'm going to try and present this as clearly as I can as to what I believe was going on at the time of Liam Payne's death. Now, Liam Payne, for those of you who don't know who he was a British singer. He began his career on the X Factor, and he was not so much of he was a very similar age to myself. So it also feels a little bit raw and rough. I was a One Direction fan. I wasn't one of the hardcore fans. I didn't go to see them, but I did have a soft spot for One Direction. And it was one of those deaths that, again, like the Matthew Perry one, really shook people. It wasn't someone that we knew that Matthew Perry had drug and alcohol issues. Liam Payne was someone who really went under the radar, and there had been a lot of talk about his appearance in the press on the lead up to his death and what was going on. He'd had some high profile relationships, he had a son, and so there was a lot going on for him at that time that was outside of the realms of what he was originally famous for, which was his voice. And so I really want to give him credit for... We're going to spend a little bit of time on the potential energy within the chart, because he was someone who had a lot of potential energy and unfortunately wasn't able to fully fulfill that potential whilst he was here on planet Earth. So without further ado, let's get into it. Liam Payne was a singer, songwriter, artist, 1/5 of One Direction. And his chart is a really beautiful mix of creativity, but also wisdom and stability. Now, the first thing that stood out to me in his chart, in his natal chart, was the stellium that he has in his chart. Now, a stellium is when we have three planets coming together within an 8-degree range. And his are Chiron, the Sun, and Mercury. Now, Chiron sat in his 9th house, and if you've listened to the other episodes, you will know that I call that 9th house the planet of adventure, the house of adventure and misadventure, because it has this kind of two sides to it. It really wants to experience and lives through experience, but it can also get it into quite a little bit of trouble every now and again when it tips the balance too far and doesn't know when to stop. So we had Chiron in Leo in the 9th house in his natal birth chart. Now, the reason why this really stands out to me is Leo is a classic pop star sign, right? Leo is wanting to be in the spotlight, wanting to be seen, wanting to be recognised and admired. And if Chiron is sat in Leo, well, instantly there's a vulnerability and a weakness to that spotlight. And in the 9th house, there's this pull of, it seems really exciting, but it also has a dark undercurrent. It also has a dark undertone. When you expand too much, too quickly, there's an explosion that happens, right? So I find that an interesting place to kind of start. with Chiron, was he perhaps drawn in by the limelight? But the interesting thing about his Sun and Mercury being in that stellium is that they sit in Virgo, and they sit in Virgo at the 6th degree. Now, Virgo is all about the detail, the perfectionism, the little things, all those little things, the everyday touches, the routine, the organisation, the support. Now, we know from people talking about him that he was very, very good at making others feel welcome, making others feel healed, accepted, whole. So there's instantly that Virgo nature to him. But what is interesting with this Chiron placement in Leo and the Sun and the Mercury being in its natural home of Virgo, is that actually his core skills, for me reading that, is in songwriting, in the behind the scenes, not in the spotlight. And I wonder if part of his journey was going to be around starting in that spotlight, starting in that Chiron, that weakness, that vulnerable stage, and moving to that behind the scenes, which is where his layers of skills and mastery lived. Within a human design sense, we talk about the life theme kicking in at 36. So he was a few years off that life theme, and those lessons kind of starting to drop in. But I wonder how much that played into the kind of route that he went down. It also brings an element of mental health coming into focus with this stellium. The 9th and 10th houses being highlighted. The 9th house traditionally linked to expanding the mind. Mercury ruling the mind. There's a lot of mental health issues, or potential, not issues, potential, that come in with that placement. I think from a human design perspective as well, Chiron is an interesting one to take note of. It's in gate 29. Gate 29 is devotion. It is through thick and thin, I stick with something. And with that mentality, again, leaves us open to difficulties. You know, when are we holding on too much? When are we not accepting that it's time to let go of something? And again, it's that Chiron placement. So the Chiron bringing the vulnerabilities out. What happens when I stay too long? His Lilith in his natal chart was in gate 17. So there's also this wild and unpredictable nature around searching for answers, around searching for solutions. And with it being Lilith, very unpredictable solutions, very sporadic. And I almost think about Lilith as being the kind of feminine Mars archetype. Like, it's quite it can be quite destructive when it's not used correctly. It can be really impulsive, really unpredictable, really uncontrollable, and gate 17 sits in the mind. So put those two elements together, that's not looking great, but it's also looking for solutions. And it has therefore really creative solutions, but also really unpredictable and not thought through solutions to problems. Now, when we look at what happened with his death, what it is seeming to have looked like is that it was an accident. It was a momentary lapse of concentration or misjudgment that led to a really tragic set of circumstances. And this Lilith in gate 17 and this solutions, quickly and constantly searching for answers, gives me goosebumps, gives me chills, because it was wildly unpredictable within that. He had two quincunxes in his chart. Now, quincunxes, it's one of my favourite words to say. You'll hear me talk about quincunxes quite a lot, because quincunxes are this, if I can describe it in moon phases, it's like the waxing moon, the final part of the waxing moon before we get to the full moon. So the waxing gibbous phase. And with that, it brings this intensity. So whenever we see a quincux in a chart, we have an intensity around those planets, around those houses, and around those zodiacs. Now, he had the Sun and Mercury, quincux the Moon, in the third house of Cancer. So we've already talked about the Sun and Mercury being in Virgo. If that was already starting to look like a vulnerability with Chiron being in that stellium, quincux the Moon left him vulnerable to moon phases, number one, and we saw this in the Heath Ledger episode. But also, it leaves him vulnerable to the home life, maybe being a hermit or a home bird, homesickness, in the third house of the mind. And the third house of the mind keeps coming back and back, but we'll keep getting these links back to the mind. Unpredictable mind, expressive mind, expansive mind, but also slightly uncontrollable. And we see that in his human design chart as well, with an undefined third eye and an undefined head. Influence, easily influenced in the mind. And he also had the Sun and Mercury quincux Lilith. So we see Lilith come back again, not just knowing what gate it's sat in, but being quincux, these two important planets in conjunction, Sun and Mercury, highlighting the mind. You know, if we can take the Sun conjunction with Mercury as very literally, it is a spotlight on the mind, a spotlight on the head, a spotlight on the way we think. And so if the moon is going to be affecting it, and Lilith, the dark part of the moon, the dark cycle, dark spot, is also affecting it, we really need to be looking at moon cycles more, especially for this person. Lilith was in his fifth house, the fifth house being the Leo link back up to Chiron, where it sits in his natal chart, and it therefore put the moon and Lilith as sextile. So there's this backing up. Now that's all right. A sextile is okay if the two planets backing up each other are pleasant planets. You know, let's say we've got the moon and Jupiter, beautifully expansive, really emotionally expansive. If you've got the moon and Lilith, you've almost got an angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other. And they are constantly backing each other up in the head. Within his natal chart, he also had Mars in a difficult place, his detriment in Libra. So the quality of Mars might not have been readily available. So I'm talking about willpower, motivation, persuasion rather than being headstrong. Again, this open influence rather than this core stability that comes with strong Mars placements. I think importantly, he was also a Scorpio rising. So Scorpio rising means that we've got Pluto in the 8th house, really prominent to look at in his chart as well. What's going on in the 8th house? What's going on with Pluto? How can we start to work with that? He was also an emotional projector within human design. And we saw this again with Heath Ledger, this real need to understand emotional cycles. Someone who is highly creative, someone who is fixed water. So there's also an air of stability to his creativity. This is really important actually for the job that he did. With that fixed creativity in there, as long as he's doing something creatively, that is going to really propel him. Now, the story or the scarring of Scorpio rising can be that there's a big need to control by knowledge. They need to know why or how something happened. There's this real destructive quality of Pluto that can really make us try to be certain about things. And this is also the story of the undefined third eye as well within his chart. There's also a self-destructive quality of Pluto in the first house. And Pluto was in his first house. Pluto is a chart ruler and it's a planet of the ascendant, and it puts this emphasis on the 8th house, which straddles Gemini and Cancer within his placement. He also had a Neptune and Uranus conjunction in the 2nd house, so this is mystery, unpredictability around values, money, relationships as well, but more so much relationships with the self, luxury, people. I do also want to add people to that, being kind of an air of mystery around, because it's around values and wealth. It's almost like, who am I getting caught up in? Whose web, whose net am I getting caught up in? So, with that said, if that was a potential energy, what was the triggers? Why did we see this international talented pop star die in his early 30s? Now, looking at the circumstances, and as I say, this is still an ongoing case, this is still something that we're getting drip-fed information about. There was 4 places that I was really interested in looking at. The 8th house, which is the chart ruler, the 12th house, which is around endings and mystery and unknowns. Also, any link to Aquarius, Uranus, aspects, degrees, because of the shocking nature of this event. The first thing, though, that I want to touch on is that this was the first full moon since the eclipse portal closed. And if we harp back to a few moments ago, I did say that the moon is a really important part of his process. Whether he recognised it or not, the moon was a big ruler for him in terms of where it sat in his birth chart. Now, it was the first full moon since the eclipse portal closed. Harping back to Matthew Perry last week, we looked at the importance of the eclipse and eclipse deaths as a whole, because there are often some really shocking events that come up with eclipses. They're really unpredictable, they mask darkness, they shroud us in darkness, and you got to think, when it's dark outside, you can't see what's happening, you can't see what's going on, you can't see the reality of, you could be in the most beautiful place, let's say it's a beautiful mansion house, right, and everything looks gorgeous and luxurious and inviting in the light, but when you turn it into the darkness, suddenly what's that sound, what's that creak, what's that shadow? Everything becomes a lot darker in so many ways. Now, the eclipses at that time were in Libra and Pisces. The second eclipse, which was what this fell just after, was in the southern hemisphere, so it was shrouding the southern hemisphere in that darkness. That's where the kind of shadow was being cast. We were leading up to this full moon at 24 degrees of Aries. Now, we were only, I think it was about a day or so off, maybe even 6 hours or so. It might not have even been 24 hours. And this was pending. This full moon was pending. So we've got it in the waxing gibbous phase. We've got it in this intense phase. And often that phase is known as that critical or intense phase rather than the full moon itself. It's that build up, same with the dark moon just before the new moon arrives. So we had the full moon pending at 24 degrees of Aries, due at around 11 a.m. on the 17th of October, within transit or conjunction of Chiron in Aries. So within the transit chart, Chiron was being activated in Aries. So therefore we have a weakness, Chiron, weakness, vulnerability to Aries, ruled by Mars, which is this focus on the head, losing our head, rage, unpredictability, this volatility. It's always volatility that comes with Mars, comes with Aries, because it's all about, red mist. It's that sort of energy. The red mist descended. That was what was building. And a full moon at 24 degrees is Pisces linked. Now, Pisces energy is mysterious. It's unclear. It's unfocused. It gives us this foggy mind, this disillusioned mind. It also gives a lot of disguises or masks falling. It's highly linked to endings. It's highly delusional, but also highly disconnected and isolated and removed. And I can't help but think he was so far from home, so far from his son. I wonder how much of that disassociation played into this tragic event. Pisces is also mutable energy, so this was kind of epiphany, endings, closures. And remember, a full moon is also about closures as well. And the sun was falling or debilitated in Libra. So we had the sun in Libra, adding to this letting go or losing feeling, maybe like I'm loosening my grip, I'm losing control, I'm losing something. And I wonder what was playing at the time of that happening, if all of this energy was stacking up to be like, this is a really transformative opportunity for this young person to have really got on top of. I keep coming back to people because a lot of this story has been around the people that were around him or not around him, or the circles that were being mixed in. So on this day also, Jupiter was retrograde, so it's expanding our inner world. Instantly not a great combination for someone who spends too much time inside of themselves. Sextile Chiron, who is also retrograde, so the problem is me. The weakness is me. It's all in me. And it's this not very pleasant combination of beating ourselves up. Where we've got Jupiter retrograde, sextile Chiron retrograde, it's like expanding our spot that we want to poke at, our scab, our inner scab. It was in Aries and Gemini, they were at play. So again, we've got this Aries hot-headedness, Gemini linked to the mind. So we've got all these things harping back to losing our mind, letting go, losing control, expanding the wounds and expanding the weaknesses of our mind. We also had Venus trine Neptune, which was in retrograde in Scorpio and Pisces relatively. So Venus in Scorpio really highlighting the downside of love, or the deep side of love, the emotional side of love, with Neptune retrograde in Pisces. Now that's a natural home for Neptune, but it's also deeply mysterious. And when we look at this case as it's gone on, we can see that there's been elements of mystery at every single opportunity. People just don't know what. It's been bizarre to watch it unfold. And love makes us do crazy things. That was the thing that really came to me with this placement. Love makes us do crazy things. This trine also being this long arm of support, build into a Pluto and Venus sextile that was like backup support. So we had Pluto in the mix as well with this, which is death, life, rebirth, opportunity to transcend. And when we start to pile all these things up, when someone's not in a good place mentally, and there's all of these mind activations alongside Pluto that, gives us the opportunity to switch the lights off, there's just a really uncomfortable feeling to that. And all of it keeps harping back to the love life. I am a big believer that we have choice and consequence, and this is not about blame of any sort. This is not about someone didn't do this or someone did do this. It's like we are all responsible for our own emotions, mental health, triggers. We are all responsible for making sure that our actions are healthy, or as healthy as they can be. And with this kind of love, like this Venus energy keeps coming back and back and back and back with this story. I wonder if part of that process was around love And it can also be linked to self-love. It's not just love of another person. It can be self-love and self-worth too. Now, Uranus was transit square to his natal Chiron. Now, a square within astrology instantly gets the alarm bells ringing because it is this push and pull. With Uranus, deeply unpredictable, groundbreaking, shocking, sending earthquakes. Chiron, we know his natal Chiron was in Leo, so in the spotlight, to someone in the spotlight. And Chiron is that vulnerability as well. Earthquakes, shocks around vulnerabilities. And this full moon that was building was a full moon that the chapter opened in March with the Aries new moon. So we've got a lot of Aries, we've got a lot of Ram, masculine, hot-headed, red-misted energy around there. And we know from the newspapers and the media outlets that there was an outburst of rage before this tragic accident. And I can't help but think, if people knew more about the moon and its cycles and how it affects our emotions and how it specifically ties into each person's chart, we can become a lot wiser and a lot more clever at looking after each other on an individual level, not just expecting it to be this blanket level of care. So what activations were in his 8th and 12th house? Well, his 8th house was being activated at 15 degrees of Gemini. His 8th house was between 15 degrees of Gemini and 23 degrees of Cancer. And his 12th house was between 27 degrees of Libra and 15 degrees of Scorpio. Now, Jupiter was sitting in his 8th house, retrograde, reflecting all the problems back within. So we've instantly got an 8th house activation, which was what I was looking for. This can be a struggle to see answers and solutions in this type of energy. Also, whilst so many planets are in retrograde as well, there's a lot of inner work going on, and sometimes we don't realise that it's the inner work that's going on. We can reflect it and refract it to outside of us. We can kind of mirror it or get triggered by it really easily because there's inner workings going on. Now, Mars was also in this 8th house, just 1 degree away from crossing the cusp of the 8th house into the 9th. It was at 22 degrees, which is the degree of destruction, and 22 degrees of Cancer is seen as the neglectful degree. So it again brings up this air of volatility, losing our head, Aries, Mars linked to the head, and with that degree of destruction that is there as well, with destructive consequences. And we saw that literally, when we saw the hotel, room that was shown on a lot of the news channels, where there had obviously been this outburst of rage. For whatever reason, we're probably not going to know about what was the trigger behind that. But we also saw it end in very destructive ways as well. And Mercury was at 4 degrees of Scorpio, which puts the mind in the 12th house. So tick, we have that 12th house activation as well. Mercury in Scorpio at the 4th degree really represents recklessness, destructive behaviour, extremist behaviour. Those are generally the words we would describe to use to describe the 4th degree of Scorpio. Extreme, reckless, destructive. Now, Uranus also had activations. Uranus had just come out of an opposition a few hours before with Venus. Uranus was retrograde in 26 degrees of Taurus. Venus was at 28 degrees of Scorpio. The 26th degree of Taurus is what's known as a critical degree. So Uranus was at a critical degree. Uranus being the planet of shock, surprises, being at a critical degree. This is an intense point highlighting the material world, the meaning of the material world, but in the eyes of a philosopher will beg the question, what is it all for? What does it all mean? If you have all the money and fame in the world and you're not happy, or your heart hurts, or you've not found the love that you were seeking, what is it all for? And the 26th degree of Taurus sits square his natal Saturn in the 3rd house, raising themes of kids and mental health, or developmental health again, with Uranus sat in the 7th house of relationships. 2 pain points when we consider he was thousands of miles from his home and from his child, with relationship issues from a former partner looming over him, and a new partner in the mix with that as well. With Pluto at 22 degrees in his natal chart in Scorpio, its natal home, there was a T-square forming in the fixed signs, and Chiron was forming the full square return at 29 degrees of Leo. The lineup would have been from the natal chart, a T-square from Chiron in Leo to Pluto in Scorpio, to Saturn in Aquarius, and Uranus transiting formed that complete picture in Taurus. Fixed earth, stubbornness, invincibility. That sort of energy with Uranus retrograde is looking for an implosion. His 11th house, which is ruled by Aquarius, was in Libra, where the sun was, where Lilith and the South Node sat as well. South Node we very often see activated in untimely deaths as well, or actually in deaths in general, not just untimely deaths. It's almost like I return back to where I came from. So the final part of the puzzle for me, with all of this triggered energy in the 8th houses, the 12th houses, Uranus and Aquarius being triggered as well, the places where we would expect to see shocking deaths, shocking endings, untimely endings being activated, was the astrocartography. As always, I like to finish on the astrocartography. He was in Buenos Aires when he died, under the weight of Jupiter. Now, Jupiter, when we sit under that line of expansion, flips it on ourselves and kind of shows us issues of self-worth. I'm not good enough to be in this space. Who am I to believe that I am worthy of this thing, this person, this opportunity? It can be really quite detrimental. And it's also, again, linked to the mind. You know, Jupiter is the philosophical mind, but it's about expanding our mind. And so if we're sat under the weight of that, it might be that we cannot expand and see the possibility, see the opportunity. We might be very stuck in our heads at that point. He was on top of his Mars line as well, so very close to that Mars line, which is a volatile line. We already know it's not in a great position in his chart. It highlights a lot of vulnerabilities and weaknesses for him in his chart, and yet he was super close to that when he died. We were also in Libra season, where the sun was fading and getting weaker. Mars and Jupiter were also in gate 48 in the human design mandala, which is called the wisdom well. This is energy sitting within those lines, going to the depths. You know, the wisdom well gate is all about going down to the deepest, darkest parts of ourselves, having an experience in dark nights of the soul, so that we can bring up the gold, we can bring up the nuggets to help other people, and to help us along our own journey as well. But it does get dark for people at times with that gate 48. And if Jupiter and Mars were both in gate 48 in his natal chart, that means that when he goes to those places, when he goes to those countries or places, or meets people from those places as well, that are close to his Mars and his Jupiter lines, they will come with an element of that gate 48 to teach him about the depths of life. It was expanding all areas of masculinity with that Mars line as well as shadows of Mars, that recklessness, volatility, somewhat unpredictable. It's like you go from 0 to 100, you lose your mind, the red mist descends, and it's described in the psychology of astrocartography as someone gallant and cool in the face of danger. and a line where you make or lose your fortunes through your thirst for life. And this harps back to those 9th house activations of Chiron as well. I think the adventure and misadventure part of his personality. The final thing for me, and with this, you know, it gives me huge goosebumps, because the astrocartography for me is always the icing on top of the cake. It's like we've kind of worked through the potential energy and the triggered energy, but why that place? Why that place? So we had this wisdom well being activated, this dark night of the soul being activated with Mars and Jupiter lines. But at the time that he died, Neptune was sweeping over Buenos Aires as well. And with Neptune conjunct Uranus in his birth chart, there's both surprising and shocking potential for Neptune. Neptune rules the world of artistry, of artists. It also rules the 12th house, or it rules Pisces, which rules the 12th house. So there's endings linked to his Neptune placement as well. And as Neptune swept over, that's when we saw the shocking death, Uranus being conjunct Neptune in his birth chart, shocking Neptune death linked to the 12th house in the world of artistry and fame, musicality, all of those creative industries that are linked to Neptune. So for me, this is another really tragic set of events and circumstances that led to an untimely death of someone who could have gone on and done so much more, watched his son grow up, being the kind of godfather of the pop world. And we see so much coming out around boy bands at the moment, with a lot of the documentaries that are focusing on the highs and lows and the scandals of that industry. And this is someone who, I again believe, if we had more knowledge of the astrology, if we had more knowledge of the moon cycles, especially the moon in men and how it can affect their emotions, how they cope with those emotions, that emotional suppression that often comes in because they can't or don't want to feel the intensity of those emotions, alongside the astrocartography, when you're in the wrong place at the wrong time with all of this energy stacking up on you, it's going to end one way. And I really hope that over the next few years we see astrology, human design, astrocartography being taken much more seriously by mental health and physical health practitioners as well, so that we can start to understand a bigger picture at play. This is not one or the other. This is not you do alternative health or you do Western medicine. This is about them all coming together to form a complete picture, so that we can help people individually and holistically to heal, not just alternatively. There needs to be this coming together of science and spirituality for this to work, and for us to really enjoy the full spectrum of experience of life on Earth. So that is the final episode of season 1 of Truly Tragic Transits. I hope that you have enjoyed that. I hope that it has given you plenty to think about and chew over and talk to your friends about. I will be doing a bonus episode on Avicii that will be coming soon, and I hope to have season 2 ready for the spring within the Northern Hemisphere. We are almost at spring. So I hope that you have enjoyed that. Please do share with your friends, leave a review, share on social media, so that I can help get this word out and about, because, as I say, the passion for me sits in the fact that if we have access to all of this information, we can make much smarter choices, and the consequences will be much more maximised towards our highest potential rather than our shadow potential. So have a beautiful day. Thank you for listening, and take care.